There we are.
All
Welcome
right.
to the McLuhan Institute Live 15. I'm calling this by any other name because a rose would smell as sweet. And Shakespeare's birthday today.
Is that right?
Yeah. So
Happy birthday.
also according to Dad's journal, it's 1616 Cervantes died, and Wordsworth as well died on this date.
Is that right, eh?
Auspicious occasion. So welcome. This is a bit of a special edition because Professor Rose here is visiting. Are you a professor right now?
Technically,
Are you
I guess
teaching?
I am,
Okay.
yeah.
Well known in media ecology circles, visiting Prince Edward County, and I talked him into doing this with me. So we'll go for about 15 minutes as usual, and just chatting about stuff. Welcome and thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I've already explained to Phil what I'm doing, which is that I'm making an inventory of Eric McLuhan's 6,000 or so volume library. I'm currently in reference books, which, and it's kind of funny. Dad has a lot of reference books in his library, and my mom kind of almost immediately following his death was trying to get rid of them. I was like, no, you can't get rid of them. She's like, well, they're not important in the library. I said, well, yes, they are. It's like, well, you don't need all those old dictionaries. I said, well, yes, you do, because, for example, and this comes up all the time in regard to the medium is the message, is that when Marshall sort of started using that term in the late 50s, medium had a different popular meaning than it does today. And one way to trace that is to go back to the old dictionaries. And that's a reason why Dad collecting, like here, this American Thesaurus of Slang.
Well, that's no ordinary dictionary.
Oh, this is kind of funny. Okay, so it's typical for Dad to write his name and the date and the place of purchase. And this is funny because he bought it in 1987 in Belleville, Ontario, which is just up the road from here in Bloomfield, near Bloomfield. But it's 10 years before they lived here, moved here, which is odd, but it makes sense because at the time, Dad was, I don't know if you know about the company he used to run called McLuhan and Davis Communications.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
No.
So this was back like in the 80s, and he and this guy, is it Richard Davis, Roger Davis, had this company, McLuhan and Davis Communications, and they basically taught business English, kind of rhetorical techniques and stuff for business people and government types. And one of the things Dad did with that was he apparently came to Belleville many times and gave workshops and seminars up in Belleville. So I guess he somehow bought this book there somewhere. So this is the American Thesaurus of Slang, a complete reference book of colloquial speech from 1943, which is pretty cool.
And how long was your father doing that for in terms of the business?
At least a solid decade. He got out of it and he ended up teaching at a place called the Harris Institute for the Arts.
Yeah.
Where he taught for, I guess, the last 15 years or so of his career, of his active teaching career. He kind of, his health was declining a little bit, and for him to go into Toronto and back was getting a bit hard, and especially after Corinne died. And he had to stay with my sisters. It was, more of an imposition.
Sure.
I ended up teaching his last couple classes there because he got kind of sick at one point, and he just decided that enough was enough. So that was kind of cool for me. But then he was out here full time in this library with these books. So this is Phil's first time here. Oh, Peter Fallon. Yes, that's Phil Rose.
Hey, Peter.
Thanks for joining us, Peter.
Yeah.
We have a media ecologist in the building. If anybody is visiting Prince Edward County, Ontario, and would like to come chat with me anytime, really, but Tuesday nights at 9 is when I do this. I'd love to have you. You don't have to be a media ecology star like Dr. Rose. Yeah, hi Peter. Nice to see you. we'll be seeing you all very soon in Toronto for the Media Ecology Association convention.
Sure, hope so.
And my mom is watching from over in the house.
Hey,
hey Mom.
hi,
That's
Mrs.
kinda
McLuhan.
funny. You can come say hi too if you want, Mom. Maybe not. Will you be presenting at MEA?
Yeah, a couple times. Yeah,
A couple times. What are you doing?
I'm actually on a memorial panel for Paul Heyer,
Okay.
who passed away last summer.
Yeah.
And then I'm on a panel dedicated to humor.
Okay.
Believe it or not.
No, I believe it for sure.
Being not such a funny guy.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I'll try and figure out something.
Okay.
Humorous.
Is there a particular slant to the humor?
I think there is, but it's been a while since I've looked at.
Oh, okay.
I was invited to be on the panel. It's not something that's necessarily emerged from my own
all right.
things. I think I can't quite remember the slant.
Sure.
To be honest, yeah.
Well, humor looms large in McLuhan world.
Yes.
Good or bad, I'm not going to judge. Puns definitely figure large in the ground.
Right.
Satires of all sorts. But Marshall, anyway, and Dad did it too. They were both known for their awful jokes, of course, but they used them as a way to set an audience at ease, you know.
Sure.
And a lot of McLuhan speeches you can watch. Some of them you can watch online. He'll even, one of his big ones, it's an hour and a half speech, and the first 20-30 minutes is all jokes. And he gets...
This is your dad? Or
Marshall.
Marshall.
He gets people, I think it's the one at University of Florida or something, and he gets people going and just losing it, and then he hits them with some like really heavy like laws of media stuff.
Right.
And then when he senses that it's getting too tense or, you know, he's losing people, out come the bad jokes again.
Right.
And it's really funny. So he uses it definitely as a technique, a rhetorical technique for getting an audience on or off board with him.
Right.
And he also had a lot to say about humor and the role of humor in society, jokes being a form of grievance.
Right.
And, he was passed away before stand-up comedy really got going, but my personal opinion would be that he would see a lot of use in stand-up comedy, and he would categorize them as artists in his in the way he used that term, as the people who are constantly engaged in perception. You know, because you know, people like Jerry Seinfeld. Do you ever notice how, you know, this or that? It's like they're always noticing and on the lookout for changes.
Sure.
I think he would have found that very useful. So the panel on humor should be fun.
Yeah, yeah. And hopefully there'll be some grievances aired too.
Right? There's never any shortage of grievances at the MEA conference.
That's right.
Who else is on the panel with you? Do you know?
Brian Cogan.
Okay.
And Jean-Pierre, whose last name is eluding me at the moment.
Okay.
From, I think he's in Montreal.
Cool.
But another of our compatriots.
Yeah. Excellent.
And I think it's just the three of us.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be fun.
Yeah. So for the Paul Heyer, I'm sort of looking forward to reading some of Heyer's books that I hadn't got a chance to read in preparation for that.
Well, so that's a handy sort of excuse.
That's
Thanks for dying, Paul.
Yeah.
Right? Jeez.
Yeah. So it's that will be I'm sure quite enjoyable to get into that. So
I'm hoping to do a couple things, but I am officially doing one thing anyway, and that is, okay, so I was going to do a look at Eric's library in comparison, set against or with Marshall's library, because I've talked a lot about Marshall's library. It's kind of my specialty. It's so ironic to be a McLuhan specialist, but anyway. But talking with Paolo about it, he encouraged me to do something else. So what I'm doing, and this will be funny, is, okay, so a few years ago, I put out a question to the MEA mailing list. And what had happened was I developed a workshop on the medium is the message. And I spend a couple of months of nights going through the first chapter of Understanding Media and reading really, really closely and deeply how Marshall used the phrase and the terms, making notes of it and throughout the book. And I assembled this workshop to really deconstruct Understanding Media with that phrase in mind. So to dive deep on what the medium as a message means, kind of to an absurd degree, really. And I was talking with a friend of mine, Chris, who's a business guy here, and he runs like an advertising marketing company. I said, hey, you should have your people come. It'll be great. I said, okay, yeah, well, why? What good would it be for them? And I didn't have a ready answer because I thought it was obvious, right?
Right.
And it's one of those things where it's so obvious that it's impossible to say. Because for me, he was asking, well, why study media? And to me, the answer to that is completely obvious, yet really difficult to articulate. So I said, well, that's a really good question, and thanks, and I'll get back to you on that. And I thought about it for a while, and I decided, I was surprised at how difficult it was to answer that question. So I emailed the MEA mailing list, I believe under the title, Why Study Media? And I explained the situation, and I asked people on the list. I figured if anybody can answer that question, there's a few thousand people on that list, right? And they're mostly in the media world, many of them teachers and researchers. If anybody was able to answer that question, it would be them, right? And I got very few answers, which doesn't necessarily mean anything because not everybody wants to even respond to anything. But I was a bit surprised at the lack of response, but then the responses I got seemed to be kind of flip and joking and, well, of course you study media because media study you and, this sort of thing, right? I thought, okay, but it's a serious question though, Anyway, so for my sins, I'm going to attempt to answer the question, why study media?
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll see how that goes.
Right on.
Yeah. And then there's something else I'd like to do, but I'm not sure whether it can happen yet or not, so I can't really talk about it.
Okay, that's to be determined at another time.
But since this is library time, what does your home library look like?
Not quite like this.
No?
No. It's actually not all collected in one space.
Okay.
So it's sort of, in different rooms.
Yeah.
And there's quite a bit of fiction, and there's quite a bit of nonfiction, I guess. And
good.
Yeah, and I guess it's always growing in the right direction, which is that is an expansion mode.
Now, do you give up books?
Give them up in terms of
like you say your library's growing, so you're acquiring
typically
books.
if there's a reason.
Okay.
In fact, actually, I brought a couple books for you because they were duplicates.
Oh, awesome! Thank you.
But I've left them in the car, so just make sure I don't drive off.
I won't. Obviously, we need more books.
Yeah.
So, no, I'm just I'm very interested in libraries since I've kind of taken it on as a subject, and I've been so surprised to find that. You think of a library as an inert thing, as a static thing, but it's not. As you said, it grows. That's one property. I guess this could come back to Elias Canetti and his different crowds of open and closed crowds and how they grow. But they grow and accumulate, and they're all different kinds. Marshall's library was very academic. Dad's has more... I think he owns every book that Stephen King put out.
Is that right? Yeah.
He was big on Stephen King. I think he admired Stephen King's writing more than any other, just about more than, as far as the craft goes, Stephen King was definitely in his top 5.
Wow.
Yeah, really interesting. And Dad was an editor, so, and a hell of a writer. So, that's significant. But I've also just become fascinated that you think, I think most people think of a book as an end product, and it's not, because if anything, it's a beginning, right? And I've learned that very intimately going through Marshall's and Eric's library now, and when you pick up a book, it's the beginning of your interaction with it, and depending on how you use any given book, you might be an important part in the life of that book. Like, look at Marshall's library and the half dozen copies of Finnegan's Wake he has that are stuffed with his notes. And Dad, whose dissertation was on 10 words in Finnegan's Wake, a book like a library can be a growing thing as well, and it gets added on to. So I'm just fascinated, and now I kind of want to know what everybody's library is like. It's cool that yours is spread out around your house. Dad's lucky in that he had this whole building to kind of populate.
Right.
And there are a few books in the house, but mostly it's out here.
Right.
And it's got a vibe, right?
Oh, it certainly does. It's actually more like a library.
Yeah.
You've even got the sections labeled there.
Yeah, well, Dad handily did that for me. Yeah, there's the McLuhan's section, which again we're going to be getting to soon, and the moderns, Menippean satire. There's a religious section. It's actually kind of funny. You'll notice, can you see it in the frame? There's a table laid out over there because I came in the other morning and one of the shelves had collapsed.
Oh. Because
these are IKEA shelves.
Oh yeah.
And they're particle board, right? And
they're not one of your sponsors.
No, they're not. I would be happy to have them, but if they manufactured a more solid, they weren't meant. What had collapsed was his shelves with his Catholic encyclopedia, which is funny on a few different levels, because it's like this much book and it's solid. So it's like basically a tree sitting on the shelf.
Right.
Anyway, it had collapsed, so I've had to do a little bit of reinforcement, and that's why some of these books are still...
Speaking of which, I've recently learned that the word codex actually originally refers to tree.
Really?
Yeah. Which is an interesting thing too.
How?
I think it must be related to paper. When paper came into use, somehow, because
the etymology.
Yeah.
Codex.
Yeah. I can't explain, but
well, cool.
Yeah.
I like that. Tree, code.
You made me think of it in saying it was like a tree there.
Right. Good. Yeah. Well, in this place with the beams, and there's a funny that piece of birch bark sitting on the wall. I found. I'll show it to you later. I found it tucked into one of Marshall's books when I was going through his library, and it has his name on it, Marshall McLuhan, and the date May, I think, 1931. And Marshall was reading a book and he needed a bookmark, so he picked a piece of birch bark off a tree or the ground or whatever and put his name and the date on it.
All right.
And it's such a cool little artifact from his Manitoba days.
Yeah.
So I had a friend of mine who's a stained glass artist sandwich it between two pieces of glass, and just about everything else from his collection made it to Fisher Library, but a few things stayed here. So.
Right on.
Which I think is to be expected.
Oh, I'd say too.
Anyway, I'm sure we're over our 15 minutes, so I'll say thank you to Phil Rose for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
On TMI Live 15, and good night, everybody. We'll see you in Toronto. When is it? June 27th?
Towards the end, yeah.
End of June, Media Ecology Association Conference in Toronto. There's a plug for you, Paolo. Good night, everybody.